Yeah, my grandfather was Scottish, so of course he had a hankering that Scotland and Ulster should be joined together in a union. But there we are. That's so long ago now. My mother is now 94, now coming 94, and I rely on her for a lot of my memories as well about those days.
But did Maureen want the Germans to win the war?
She, not particularly. They wanted the British to lose the war, so that then they would leave Ulster or the 6 counties free to join the South. And I view now with great interest what is happening in the present day. But my roots, of course, are Pembrokeshire, because although I have this ancestry, and I have still relations living in Malta and in Northern Ireland, I'm a Pembrokean. Pembrokeshire is the place I live in, the place I love very much. So, yeah, it's these are only memories.
Going back to the Corridon, was when it sunk the first time that you had been in action with the enemy?
In a personal point of view, yes, I'd seen ships being sunk in the convoy coming across. We lost quite a few ships, but when you're young, it's surprising. You don't think anything is going to happen to you, and you see these ships being sunk. And when the Corridon was hit, there was no feeling of fear. You didn't sort of want to jump over the side or anything like that. Although, funnily enough, the 2 Dems gunners, when we realised what was happening, and there was a decision to beach the ship, we looked round for the 2 Dems gunners who'd been put on board. One of them was sitting in a lifeboat with his bag all packed, and the other one was busy trying to unship the gun in case we needed to take it ashore, which was quite surprising. It was a small Hotchkiss, I think. Hotchkiss machine gun. But the only other time before the war was when we'd been threatened, was when Corridon tried to run the Spanish blockade into Barcelona with a cargo of coal, and the first time I'd ever seen a warship approach menacingly, and that was the cruiser Canarias, who came up to the limit, and how, I don't remember, I don't even know, advised us that we were not to come in to territorial waters. So we were obliged then to go to Oran with the coal, and the coal was transshipped in Oran into all kinds of ships that hadn't seen the light of day since the 1418 war, turret deck ships that I'd never seen except in books. And one of Potato Jones's ships was in Oran at the time. He was running the blockade. It was where we lost one of our junior engineers, who came from, I can't remember, so I won't say it, but he came from a very remote part of West Wales, went ashore in Oran, and wasn't seen again, but turned up some months later back home, and no one ever knew what had happened to him. We have our suspicions. In fact, I'm writing a short story at the moment which puts the ending that I think probably should have happened if it hadn't happened, where he turns up to be a very wealthy businessman in Egypt, but that's another story. But we went, it reminded me then, because it was to do with the war, we went then to the Black Sea, and from Iran we went to the Black Sea to pick up a cargo of grain to take to Hamburg, and this is in 1938-39, and we were frozen up in a port called Nikolaev, and we weren't allowed ashore. The Russians put armed guards on the ships. They loaded about 3,000 tons of grain, and suddenly relationship between Russia and Germany began to look very menacing, and they sucked all the grain back out, took it all back out again. We were there for several weeks, and they then loaded the ship fully. We left with an icebreaker, took us down the river. The guy they put on board to look after us was more German in his dress, very smart green uniform with polished leather leggings and boots, always carried a stick and a very correct peaked hat, who made life very difficult for us. We had a Cardiff crew on board, and he found that our steward was called, he went by the name of Lucas, but his proper name was Lucassi, Italian origin. And this guy, whom I swear was more German than Russian, made life extremely difficult for the steward by demanding coffee and food, etc., at all sorts of peculiar times. But he left the ship in the Black Sea at the mouth of the River Bug, and the steward gave him a special coffee. He said, "This is specially for you." And he gave him a large cup of coffee, well laced with rum, but the secret ingredient was a spoonful of stuff called blackjack, which was a common aperient on ships. So we imagine that in the hour it took him to get ashore, that this would have had the desired effect. So we felt we got over that. It was then that I saw the German pocket battleship, the Graf Spee, coming out of Gibraltar Harbour. And we went round to Hamburg, but we didn't get to Hamburg. They put us alongside of Bremerhaven. And again, we were only allowed ashore at certain times. We had guards there. And I had never been ashore in Germany before. And it was my first experience of seeing the Hitler youth movement marching. Kids of about 7, 8, up to about 12, marching in formation, just like an army. And the shops, the shops had very little in them. The butcher shop, I remember, had just one string of sausages. I don't remember anything else in it. But they, again, we were kept under very tight surveillance there. I know that's out of context with the sinking of the Corrigan, but it's just occurred to me that was part of a wartime build-up. The pocket battleship coming out of Gibraltar, the thing that intrigued me the most was the fact that it made such a hell of a noise. It was a motor ship, a very noisy motor ship, and I thought, well, if ever that thing was in action, you could hear it a couple of miles away before it ever got near you. So there we are.
Did you know Potato Jones?
No. I didn't know him. I knew some of the crew. No, he was a North Walian Potato Jones, and I only knew of his exploits by reading about them. I've no idea what happened to him even. Oh, except I believe he ran ball bearings during the war from Sweden back to the UK. But that again is something I only have had second hand. My uncle, you see, one of my uncles was at sea during the Prohibition, and he was in a rum running organisation. Unfortunately, he died before he could tell me a great deal about it. But he certainly was there.
Did you have any interest in the Spanish Civil War?
Not really. we weren't as well informed, I think. The Spanish Civil War was a burning issue, particularly in South Wales, because so many people signed up with the anti-Franco brigade. A lot signed up on the side of the communists. They had people certainly from the South Wales valleys went. But again, it seemed to me that it was something that just tore a country apart somewhat needlessly. And they seem to have gone full circle again now. They're back to a monarchy, which is what they were trying to get rid of. But I think history throws up people and events almost out of reaction to sort something out.
If we can pick up the narrative after you'd finished at the Donegal school, what happened to you then?
We were the schools were circulated with lists of requests from government about joining various services, and eventually I applied for a post with the Royal Fleet Auxiliary, and because my own company Corries had lost 2 of their ships, which meant they only had 1 left, so my chances of getting a job with them were remote, and I thought I would try something else. I think the word royal influenced me quite a bit. I thought this was going to be something I ought to do. And I was accepted for the Royal Fleet Auxiliary and then went into their fleet oilers. They were ships that used to oil ships in port. They had a variety of them. Fairly elderly. The first one I joined was a thing called the Prestol, and she, like a lot of those ships, was quite unique for tankers. She had the bridge, engine room, etc., amidships, and the oil tanks then were on either end of the ship, fore and aft. Nowadays, tankers have everything is in forward of the bridge and the bridge is aft because of safety and so on. She was also unique in as much that she couldn't discharge all the cargo, because if she did, she would have capsized. The thing was built like a yacht, wooden decks. I mean, it was quite unusual. And there were 2 classes. There was the Prestol, and then there was that was the All class. Then there was another class which was identical but twice the size, called the Leaf class, and they had the same problem. They were very fast. They do about 16 knots, but totally unsuited for carrying oil, really. And that one was mainly we used to run between around Scotland, if I remember, across to Ireland, up to Scapa Flow. And then those ships, I was in a couple of those. We spent most of our time either oiling at sea in the Clyde, or in Loch Ewe, or in Stornoway, or in Scapa Flow. Stornoway I remember well because I was 3rd officer, and quite a young, naive 3rd officer. I was persuaded by a group of the crew who were making a net that we could net for salmon in Stornoway. And I thought this was a very good idea. So I went with them. We had a boat, and we rowed ashore about 3 o'clock one morning into the mouth of the River Creed. And the river was owned by Lord Leverhulme. He had a big estate there. And we spread the net across the entrance. I only did what I was sort of told, as it were, because the chap in charge was one of the senior greasers of firemen, as we called them, and he had been a fisherman, knew all about it. And unfortunately, we obviously had got quite a few salmon in because the net was quite full. The boat, the idea was that we would bring both ends of the net in towards the boat and then row back out and go back to the ship. Unfortunately, the boat touched the beach. I, being the youngest, jumped out into the knee-deep water to push it off while everyone was trying to row like mad. And as they were rowing, suddenly the boat took off, left me there, and at the same time a group of people came across down the beach towards where I was standing, and I was hauled ashore, taken to Kirkwall, is it? Capital of Stornoway, and this was by now about 5 o'clock in the morning, and they kept me there until they could contact the ship, A, to check that I was who I said I was, and B, to fine me for poaching. But there was no evidence, they couldn't catch the rest. So that's the only time I've ever spent the night part of the night in jail.
I don't think you were with this ship very long.
No.
Bristol.
No. I went to a ship called the Mixol, I think, which again was a very similar, different style of ship, but the same size and doing the same work. And then the Admiralty posted me then to a ship called the Aldersdale, which was an ex-BP tanker, fairly new, and we were sent to Iceland after being in dry dock in Glasgow, where we were fitted out with copper hoses that ran right round the ship and a special winch aft, because we were going to use these hoses to oil ships at sea while underway. It hadn't been done before. Over the stern. The hoses were to be filled with compressed air and floated astern on little buoys, small floats. So we went to Iceland and did a couple of trial runs with that. We did, and I can't remember here, I honestly can't remember how many excursions we made. We never made a full convoy to Russia at the time, but we made a couple of excursions to test out this gear with convoys. It was pretty horrendous because we were insufficiently crewed to handle these copper hoses. They were big 6 or 10 inch copper hoses. They were quite large, and it didn't work quite. They had a tendency to sink all the time. And then if the cruiser or the destroyer that picked up the hose, if they didn't retain the precise tension, at one time we had a wire stretched between the two ships in order to keep the tension correct. Otherwise, the hose took the weight. But it wasn't successful, and it was an absolute killer for the crew. It really was. I mean, you were working at some of the time in sub-zero temperatures. If you took your gloves off and you even touched a handle into the chart room or something, the skin came off your fingers. It was pretty horrendous. And of course none of us, neither the Admiralty nor ourselves, were used to working in this sort of climate, in a ship that wasn't built for this climate. It was built for the Persian Gulf. But the first convoy I remember making, we ran into ice. It was winter time. We ran into very thick, heavy ice, and contrary to everything that I always thought, that ice fields were comparative regions of calm because the ice would stop the swell. In fact, it was exactly the opposite. the ice was heavy, but the swell used to lift it up and throw it onto the deck, and it was nothing to get a flow of some 5 or 10 or even 15 tons hitting the deck, taking the rails with it, and bending valves and so on, which made life extremely difficult. And the two things I remember most about that particular convoy, must have been sometime in the early 41s or late 41s, I can't remember, was where an enormous floe came up and caught the anchor, which was housed and had steel chains fastening it, hit the anchor, and the whole anchor ran out 9 shackles, which is 135 fathoms of chain. And when it came to heaving 135 fathoms of chain, we had to stop the ship because we couldn't do it. And in the meantime, we were being pounded by ice. Having got that back, it was decided by this time the convoy had virtually dispersed itself. Escorts had gone. We were now in thick fog as well. And while we were trying to turn the ship round to return, we almost hit a destroyer, which we now realize was a German warship of some kind on its way, and he was also so busy trying to get out of where he was that I think that everyone was taken by surprise. It was seconds. We heard something, we saw something. It lasted about half a minute. We disappeared from view, separated by great wedges of ice. And when we got back to dry dock in the Clyde, we'd lost rivet heads, and the side of the ship was scoured clean with the ice. So the tactics had to change. They then took all the copper hoses off and put rubber hoses on, which is far better. We went back up to Iceland. By now the weather was a lot better. It was daylight was improving all the time. But we were sent from Valfjord, where we had there was a convoy collecting in Valfjord, and unfortunately several of those dragged anchor in a gale and went ashore. We went to Seyðisfjord on the east coast, and to our utter surprise we were put as a guard ship across the entrance because HMS Sheffield had been hit outside, had come back in a semi-sinking condition, and in order to protect the entrance against possible U-boat entry, Aldersday was laid across the entrance, which I thought was not a particularly bright idea. We had black fuel on board, aviation spirit and diesel. But anyway, we were there for a while. We were able to get ashore in Valfjord and in Iceland, but we weren't very popular.
Why not, do you think?
I think the Icelanders resented the fact that we were using their territory as a jumping off place. The policeman in Seyðisfjord, who used to go around on a bicycle, was pro-German, pro-Nazi, not just pro-German, but pro-Nazi. And he made it quite clear to us that he thought the best thing that could possibly happen was for the Germans to win the war and for the Nazi regime to be extended right across the whole of Europe. He thought it was a marvelous system. And anyone who was not Aryan was inferior. We had two Maltese engine room staff, greasers, and he particularly selected them for his enmity. Made it clear that he thought that they were much inferior to anyone else.
Just by his remarks?
Oh yes, he spoke quite good English, and by his officiousness. I mean, he had the authority to stop us and ask us what we were doing, where we were going, why weren't we doing this, that and the other. Quite an offensive character. Anyway, we went from Sidesfjord, we went back round to Valfjord. We fueled an aircraft carrier. The reason I mention this is because a friend of mine was a Fleet Air Arm pilot, Gwyn Mathias from Haverfordwest, known as Dilly. And I think I probably was the last person to see him alive, from Haverfordwest that is, because we fueled his ship, and he and I had a conversation, not very long. We'd been very good friends at school, and they took off in a strike against Norwegian fjords, and I think practically the whole squadron was wiped out either by bad weather or by enemy aircraft. It was one of these sometimes futile things that are done during the war with little hope of success, but you felt you had to make a gesture, I suppose. I don't know. So we then left on the final voyage of the Alders Day. We were on our way to Only Oil at Sea. We were supposed to go as far as Bear Island and then return with a returning convoy. And we left Valfjord sometime in June. I don't remember the date. And proceeded up the west coast of Iceland, up round through the Denmark Straits on our way. And almost immediately we left, we were picked up by a big reconnaissance plane, a Bloemen Voss, who stayed with us virtually the whole time, obviously relieved, but the same type of plane. And he followed us all the way until the convoy was dispersed. And we were attacked almost as soon as we cleared the north of Iceland. We began getting long-range attacks, submarine attacks occasionally. I think there were 36 ships left. Well, I think that probably included the escort as well. We had Americans, we had some Liberian flagships, Panamanian flagships. Liberians weren't in action much in those days. And the weather was beautiful. It was flat calm almost, blue sea, blue sky. We knew the water was cold because one of our crowd had decided that it was so hot in Valfjord one day and the sea was so clear and blue that he'd go for a swim, and he went down the accommodation ladder. Fortunately, he went that way and jumped in the water, and within 5 seconds he had hold of the bottom of the ladder, pulling himself out. If he hadn't, I think he would have frozen to death. The sea temperature was almost freezing even then. The air temperature was about 60. It was incredible. A chap called Harris, wireless operator. But anyway, we went off, and we were subjected to increasing attacks until in the end we were being attacked by torpedo aircraft mostly. We